Hello and welcome back to another FPL captaincy video. Today we have another double game week. It is game week 33 where we have a couple of teams doubling in Arsenal, Man City, Crystal Palace and Aston Villa, and we're going to take a look at the best captaincy option for this week using all of the important stats including expected goals, the odds, the chances from each of the teams that our players are playing against. So make sure you leave a like on the video if you do enjoy, subscribe if you're new because we do this every single week. And speaking of every single week, this is how our current scores are getting on. And Isak repaid us in game week 32 after a blank in game week 31, and it was a good captaincy, obviously picking up a 22 pointer, but it could have been so much more. Newcastle scored 9 goals over the 2 matches and he only picked up 1 of them, so it could have been a massive haul, but 22 points is still good enough. It still gives us that nice golden score, which we obviously love to see. So we've got 4 more picks for this week. Let's take a look and see who they are going to be. So we've got 3 more doublers this week, as well as Mohamed Salah, who has a really favourable fixture against Leicester, and I don't think he is someone that you can rule out as a good captaincy option this week, because a lot of our players on our list today have, maybe a slight problem with expected minutes, or a bit of a more difficult opponent. For example, Marmoush playing against Everton away is a very, tough fixture to go against. I think Everton are like the 5th or 6th best defence in the league, and away from home, I wouldn't really expect Marmoush to do too well in that match, in which case you're really just relying on Villa at home. And if you're just going to be relying on a single, fixture, do you just go for Mohamed Salah? I think with Saka as well, a bit of a minutes risk. Mateta has been getting subbed early more recently than not, and of course he has a very tough fixture against Arsenal as well. So we are going to take a look into all of this stuff to see who is going to be the best captaincy. Starting us off with predicted points, and last week we were seeing, into the 13s, the 12s and 13s for a lot of our doublers, but this week it is a lot less. Again, the fixtures are a little bit more difficult and the expected minutes aren't there for a couple of our players. But at the top on both websites, Fantasy Football Hub and FPL Team, both predict Marmoush to be the best scoring player this week. Marmoush at the top of every player in the game. I believe it's Watkins that FPL Team has to do the best this week, but out of our 4 picks today, it is Marmoush on both websites. Now he's only 0.3 ahead of Mateta. Again, looking at Mateta, there's a big discrepancy between his points on Fantasy Football Hub and his points on FPL Team. Fantasy Football Hub does tend to have a higher expected points than FPL Team does, but obviously, almost 4 whole points is quite a large margin. Similar with Saka, 3 points in there between their 2 predictions, but Marmoush is at the top on both websites, and second place on FPL Team is actually Mohamed Salah. They predict Salah to do better against Leicester than Mateta and Saka, despite having a double game week. Now, of course, Salah is the least for Fantasy Football Hub, again, the fact that he doesn't have a double game week, but 8.1 points from 1 match is still absolutely huge. So as I said, definitely not one that you want to be overlooking. So looking at the X minutes then, which is a big factor into our captaincy for this week. Now Mohamed Salah with 1 match is expected to play the full 90, so definitely a positive there if you are looking to captain him. We've got Marmoush, again, obviously the max minutes over 2 games is going to be 180, so he's only expected to miss 12 minutes, so that's not really too bad at all. That's like an 84th minute sub in both matches, so very promising with him. With Mateta, he's expected to play a little bit more, but he was subbed again early last night against Newcastle. He is still expected to play 172 over the double, which again is only like an 86th minute substitution, so not too bad there. I did think his expected minutes would be a lot more with Nketiah missing, but he is still getting subbed off, which is obviously a little bit unfortunate if you do own him. And then we've got Bukayo Saka, who's only got 118 minutes, which means if he was to play the full 90, he's only expected to play 28 in his next match, so not too great at all. I think the general consensus this week seems to be that he'll start 1 match and then get benched in another and come off the bench. So is that worthy of a captaincy? I'm not really too sure. That is going to be, a tough one to try and decide, because based on his fixtures against Ipswich and Palace, he probably is the easy standout captaincy choice if he was going to play 90, even 80 minutes in both matches. But with the potential benching, obviously coming back from an injury and them now progressing in the Champions League, Arteta's probably going to want to keep him, on ice as much as possible so he doesn't get injured before the later stages of the UCL. He is still the top for return chances, however, given an 87% chance of returning. In second place, it is Marmoush. He's only got a 79% chance of returning, so a fair difference between them both. But then it is Mateta at 72%, and then Salah. Obviously, these stats are taken from Fantasy Football Hub, who had Salah as the least for predicted points, but he is the least as well for return chances with a 68%. Again, if Salah had a double game week, he'd probably be so much higher than that, considering the fact that he's only 4% behind Mateta and he's got a full game less. Still makes Salah a really, really nice option, obviously top for expected goals and expected assists so far this season. As we are bringing this out on Thursday, we actually have the odds for both matches in the double game week, which is of course ideal. Salah, however, speaking on just the single game week, has the highest with a 52% chance of scoring against Leicester, a 20% chance of scoring 2 or more, and Leicester are only given a 9% chance of a clean sheet, which of all the fixtures this week does make him look the best option, but of course he does still only have one fixture. So looking at someone like Marmoush, given a 37% chance to score against Everton and a 43% chance to score against Villa, it does make him look like the best option for scoring at least one goal in this game week. When it comes to 2 or more though, I don't really think there's too much of a difference. He's given a 10% chance to score 2 against Everton and a 14% chance to score 2 against Villa, which I think when you combine them isn't really too much more than Mohamed Salah's 20% against Leicester. Again, the clean sheet chances are a little bit higher, with a 22% chance of a clean sheet with Everton and a 15% chance of a clean sheet with Aston Villa. So again, it's one of those ones where Mohamed Salah could easily outscore a lot of double game week players this week. Of course, he does get the extra point for the goals, and he's more likely to keep a clean sheet this week. Leicester have been very, very poor when it comes to goal scoring, and Salah also gets that extra point from clean sheets. So that is something to keep in mind. We could be looking at an extra 2 points just from Mohamed Salah playing and scoring, even just one goal. When we look a little bit further down, we've got obviously Mateta and Bukayo Saka, who aren't looking as promising. Again, looking at Mateta's stats, Arsenal have a 48% chance of a clean sheet against Palace. He's not really looking too likely to pick up a goal. 22% chance is fairly low, especially for a captaincy option. So I think it does kind of rule him out as a pick. The double game week is obviously very promising, but I don't expect him to do much, if anything, against Arsenal, so it really feels as though it's just going to be a single game week against Bournemouth. For Saka, again, really tough when it comes to expected minutes, but his stats are still looking pretty decent. A 38% chance of scoring against Ipswich and a 35% chance of scoring against Palace. Obviously, the majority of his points have came from assists this season, which aren't included in this as well, so that's an extra avenue to points. As far as the set pieces go, as always, we like to pick penalty takers, and the only penalty taker we don't have here is Omar Marmoush. Now, that is obviously a huge factor when it comes to penalties, and Marmoush is probably looking like the best option so far. Again, with Haaland out the team, City still haven't had a penalty, so we don't know who is going to be taking penalties. It is still listed as Kevin De Bruyne, so it is likely that he does take the penalties. Obviously, if Gundogan's on the pitch, he did take penalties before when he played for Man City, before he transferred to Barcelona, so he could also be an option. So we don't really know if Marmoush is going to be taking the penalties. I do think it is going to be Kevin De Bruyne though, and Marmoush is going to have to, take us a couple of steps back when it comes to that. Again, that does put advantage on Mohamed Salah or maybe a Bukayo Saka as well. So it's quite a tough one this week. Obviously, I think Salah is looking like the best pick, but he doesn't have the double game week that Marmoush has. And of course, Marmoush has the advantage over the other double game week players like Saka with the expected minutes. And of course, Mateta has been prone to an early sub as well. So it's quite hard. Do you want to pick the penalty taker? Do you want to pick the minutes player? Or do you want to pick the single game week player? It's very, very tough when it comes to picking a good captaincy option for this week. In terms of rest, of course, the advantage goes to Mohamed Salah having the full week's rest in only one game week. He's got the full week to prepare for this match against Leicester, not having to worry about double game weeks or Europe at all either. Obviously, the only player still in Europe in these 4 picks is Bukayo Saka. He played 77 minutes against Real Madrid last night, so that does put him on the radar for a potential benching against Ipswich to keep him as good as possible, but we do still have all the way until Sunday to give him a rest for that. So if he is going to start against Ipswich, which I think is more likely, I think the more likely option is that he gets benched against Crystal Palace 2 days later. So we're looking at potentially, a start against Ipswich, playing about 70 minutes, and then off the bench against Crystal Palace, where he could potentially pick up about 30. So when it comes to his actual minutes, it's maybe looking about similar to the likes of Mohamed Salah playing the full 90. I think over the 2 games it's likely that Saka plays maybe about 100, 110. Obviously on Fantasy Football Hub he is expected to play 112, so that does add up quite nicely. Obviously, Mateta gets the extra day as well. He's playing against Bournemouth on Saturday, gets 3 days rest against Wednesday, which is going to be useful for his minutes. Marmoush, a little bit less, playing on Saturday against Everton. He's only got 2 days before he plays against Aston Villa at home. So it is Marmoush and more importantly Saka that is hindered the most by the rest, with him having European football during the week. Now, when it comes to the opponents for each of our players, Salah is up against the weakest opponent of the week, playing against Leicester, who are second for expected goals conceded, with a massive 72 goals conceded so far this season. But when it comes to the chances conceded, they've not actually conceded that many chances down Salah's side. So yes, Leicester will probably concede quite a few to Liverpool, but however many, are by Mohamed Salah is probably not as many as you would expect. Don't think everything is going to go through Salah. Again, there's more chances conceded down the left-hand side, and of course even more chances down the middle, where Leicester have conceded an absolute ton with 242. For our next captaincy option in Marmoush, he's probably looking like the best so far with the double game week, but he's up against the 16th worst defence in Everton, so the 5th best defence, and Villa aren't exactly too bad a defence either. Both 16th and 10th, which isn't the worst thing in the world, and they haven't conceded a ton of chances either down the middle. For example, you can see the likes of Bournemouth, Ipswich and Palace all more or similar to Everton and Villa when it comes to chances down the middle. So 175th and 162. I believe that puts Villa outside the top 10 as well for the league with chances conceded down the middle. So nothing really promising, nothing really too great to look at when you're obviously picking up a captaincy option this week. Again, Mateta playing against 2 very solid defences, Arsenal the best defence in the league and Bournemouth the 7th best defence in the league. It really does rule him out. I don't think he's a captaincy option at all for this week with everything that we have seen so far. And then Saka, again, a really nice pick. Ipswich, 3rd worst defence in the league, and then Palace are 13th, so a bit more stronger, but Ipswich is looking like the best option. They do have 111 chances conceded down Saka's side, which is a little bit more promising, and the best on this table as well, which is going to be good for Saka, but it is just the fact that his expected minutes are going to be a little bit of a problem. So a very difficult week to pick a captaincy this week, and I've opted to go for Omar Marmoush. Now, if you don't like him as a pick, I would be very tempted to go for Mohamed Salah, because he's going to be a huge differential option this week. And if he scores 2 goals against Leicester and keeps a clean sheet, he's got a very good chance of a haul and outscoring a lot of double game week players so far this week. I think Marmoush looks like the best option on paper. He's got the highest expected points on both sides. He's got the 2nd highest return chance, which is of course only behind Bukayo Saka, who has a high expected minutes risk. He obviously has the expected minutes, expected to only miss out 12 over the 2 games, and he has the biggest goal odds over the 2 matches. Obviously Salah has the biggest over his 1 match with Leicester, but combining both of Marmoush's matches, he has the higher chance of picking up at least 1 goal. So I think on paper Marmoush is looking like the best option, but if you don't want to go for a double game week player, if you need to gain rank rank. I think Mohamed Salah is looking like a fantastic option this week as a huge differential, because everyone is going to be picking a captaincy who has a double game week. But that is going to be it for today's video. If you do agree with the captaincy, let me know down in the comments, or if you're going to go for something a little bit different. Again, make sure to subscribe if you are new. My team selection will be out tomorrow, so make sure you turn on notifications so you know when that comes out. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.